What's going on YouTube? John Conrad here from Drone One Media, and today's video is all about the very best camera settings for the Phantom 4 Pro. Down below I have Amazon links to both the Phantom 4 Pro with and without the display. So if you're looking to buy a drone and you click that link, I get a small percentage of it. Helps me out, helps keep the channel going, and I really appreciate the support. I've also linked down below the Polar Pro ND filters as well. So if you're looking to get some ND filters, they have some great options. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any upcoming videos. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Before we get into the camera settings, let's go over here. And the histogram I always leave turned on. Histogram's a really useful tool, allows you to see if the image is properly exposed. And the idea is you want the largest mountains to kind of be in the center of the histogram. That means the image is properly exposed. Front LEDs auto turn off, I will leave on. Overexposure warning, this is really useful because it shows in the image which parts are overexposed by the zebra lines. Video caption, I'm going to go ahead and leave off. Autofocus assistant, I will turn on. Manual focus assistant, I will also turn on. I always like to have grid lines on the screen. It easily allows you to check your rule of thirds. And what this means is you want something in the image on the left, something in the center, and something on the right. And this makes for a more pleasing image. So grid lines are really helpful when you're shooting. Next up, center points. You have a variety of center points to choose from. Center points are used more on the FPV mode. Next up is anti-flicker, and I just leave that set on automatic. File index mode, and I like putting this on continuous because that way no file names will ever be repeated. So if you fly 3 flights one day and 3 flights the next, it will be file names 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 versus 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that could get a bit confusing when you're copying data over to your computer. So I always like it set on continuous. And you can have custom camera settings presets that you can set up as well. And you can format the SD card, which erases all the content on the micro SD card that's plugged into the drone. And you can also reset the camera settings. Next up, we can change the photo settings from single shot to multiple shot. And you can take up to 14 photos in a burst mode. And also you can take 3 or 5 different photos of different exposures. So that makes it great when you're doing HDR photos. And there are time shots as well. Next up, the image format. You can either shoot in RAW, JPEG, or JPEG plus RAW, which saves 2 photos every time you snap the camera. But I like to shoot in RAW because it gives you the most detail possible in the image. Next up is the white balance menu, and you can select automatic or select from a variety of different lighting conditions from sunny, cloudy, incandescent, fluorescent, or you can even customize the color temperature in the white balance from cool to warm and anywhere in between. But I usually leave mine set on automatic. Now the style menu, you can actually do standard, landscape, soft, or you can do your own custom one. I like to do my own custom one because I reduce the sharpness, the contrast, and the saturation down a bit, which gives it a flatter, softer image in post, which is better to work with. You can sharpen it up in post if you like, and you can also add the contrast and saturation, which personally works for me. But if you don't really want to color grade the image much and you just want to cut it together afterwards, I would stick with the standard or the landscape. Next up, the color menu, and they have a variety of different colors on here. If you don't want to color grade in post, I would stick with normal. And D-Log actually strips a lot of the information away from the image and gives it a very grayish tone, which used to work great on the Phantom 4, but for some reason on the Phantom 4 Pro, it strips away too much detail for my liking. So I like to film in D-Cinelike, which I think is better to work with in post for my projects. These settings should really depend on what you want to do with the footage afterwards. If you simply want to cut it together, I would just stick with automatic. Personally, I like using manual mode. It gives me more control over the footage and really gets some better looking footage in my opinion, but you have to work with it more in post. First up is the ISO control, and you can change the ISO all the way from 100 to 12,800. The ISO controls the noise of the image. So in low light or nighttime shots, you actually need to increase the ISO to let more light into the sensor. But during the day, you always want to film on ISO 100 when there's plenty of light. That way, there's very little noise in the image. And there is an aperture control on the Phantom 4 Pro, which is really nice for adjusting the exposure of the image. At f11, the image is properly exposed. The EV is at -0.7, which is just fine. What I found is once you go past the 1.2 or 1.5 negative, it's really hard to bring detail out of the shadows, but -0.7 from my experience has been just fine. And the shutter speed, I always like to set my shutter speed at 60 because that is exactly 2 times the frame rate. I'm shooting at 4K, 30 frames per second, so I always like to have my shutter speed set at 60, which I find produces much smoother footage. When you start increasing the shutter speed, it creates footage with a lot more motion blur. So I like setting my shutter speed at 60, which I think produces the best, most cinematic-like footage. And once you get done setting the ISO at 100 and setting your aperture and setting your shutter speed, you may find that there's still too much light entering the drone. And for that, I would recommend the Polar Pro ND filters. You can pick up a set of these for $100, which I think is pretty fair. They're really nice, high quality glass. They reduce the light that enters the drone, which is very helpful on bright sunny days when you still want to keep your ISO at 100 and your shutter speed at 60. Next up, the video size. So you can select a variety of sizes, 2 different sizes for 4K. I usually film on 3840 by 2160, and you can select your frame rate at either 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. I usually shoot on 30 frames per second, but different parts of the world shoot 24 frames per second. You can also shoot 2.7K as well, and 1080p in a variety of frame rates, all the way up to 120 frames per second for slow motion footage, but I usually shoot 3840, 1920, 30 frames per second. Next up is the video format, and you can toggle between MP4 and MOV. I like MOV because it's more Mac friendly and I edit all my videos on a MacBook. NTSC and PAL, I shoot in NTSC because I'm in North America, but always check your local region codes to decide, if you want to shoot in PAL or NTSC. White balance, again, you can select auto, and color, same as before. I choose D-Cinelike. Camera video coding, you can select between H.2.64 or H.2.65, which I like H.2.65 because it's higher quality footage, it's a higher bit rate, it looks better, although it does take an extra step to convert it over to ProRes to use in Final Cut Pro. Last thing you want to make sure is you always tap to focus before you go fly. And this video has been all about the best camera settings for the Phantom 4 Pro. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to go ahead and give it a thumbs up. It helps out a lot more than you would think. And if you're looking for any upcoming videos, drop me a comment down below. Let me know what kind of videos you'd like to see on the channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss any upcoming videos on the channel. I'm John Conrad from Drone One Media. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.